All right, here we go. So yeah, so this is rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock. So first step in a application like this would be to try to figure out what classes we're going to need. So right now we just have a blank project starts with a program class. So what are some of the classes we're probably going to end up adding to this?
Player.
Player. Yeah, I think that's a good one. So let's add that in first. Cool. What are some other ones?
Game.
Yeah,
Game?
Gameplay.
Yeah, I like that. Definitely game. To me, the game class seems like that's going to end up being the largest one, similar to how the battlefield was in the Robots Dinosaurs.
Yeah, I didn't do game, I did battle board.
Yeah, different ways that you could call it, but I think having a largest class that sort of all the other ones are a part of, regardless of the name, I think that's important.
Okay.
So yeah, you could call it board, you could call it, you could technically call it battlefield in this too if you want. Cool, so we got game, player, what else would we need?
A human class.
Gestures.
Human, yes.
Human.
Human, and so what's sort of the counterpart to human?
AI or
AI.
Yeah. Let's call it computer. I heard someone else say gesture. I think that's a good idea. I don't know if we'll end up using it, but I think, maybe just sort of creating it for now to think of, to set, to sort of collect our thoughts, thinking that, yeah, having a gesture class might be a good idea. So now, we could end up having, a class for each one of the sub gestures. If we end up going that route, I'm not going to go ahead and add them right yet because I don't think at this point, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. But everything else, to me, that's, we've got our highest level, we've got our player class, we've got both of the types of players, then we also have a gesture. I think that's probably all we'll need right now to sort of get things rolling. There's one more thing that I want to do though is looking at this player class, what type of class do we think this might end up being?
Parent class.
Parent class, yeah, definitely. So with the player, we have the two, subclasses. Human and computer are both types of players. And if you remember from the inheritance lecture, inheritance relationships are the is-a relationship. A human is a player. A computer is a player. So we can add that inheritance here on our two subclasses. Player. And now, do you remember what specific type of class might end up being a parent class? When we think about this game, are we ever going to have a player by itself? I think we're only going to have types of players. We're going to have a human, we're going to have a computer, but we're never going to have just a player. So that's meaning we're never going to instantiate the player. And there's a certain type of class. Exactly.
Abstract class.
Yeah. Abstract classes are great for parent classes because they actually can't be instantiated. There's really no need to ever instantiate an abstract class. And since we're not going to, ever have a player, I think that makes sense to have it as abstract for now. Cool. So yeah, so we've got our classes sort of set up. The next thing I would probably do is go in and throw in that skeleton that I always like to use. Remember, variables has a all right. So we'll copy this and put it in all of my classes. May not end up using all of the pieces in every class. Some classes might not actually have any methods. Some of them might not put anything in the constructor, but I think it's still always a good idea to lay it out there as a general, skeleton for our classes. And now I'm going to add a constructor for each class.
Ooh, excuse me.
All right. Yeah, we're recording this, so I'm going to mute everyone who isn't muted.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Let's go on the soundboard.
Oops. Oops. Mute all. Okay. So yeah, feel free to unmute yourself, like for questions and stuff. All right. So I think we've got a good setup. I have all of my. Oh, okay. I was building some constructors here. All right. So now what I'm going to do is, typically what I would do is go to my main class, my largest class. In this case, the game class. And this is where I would, remember from the previous project, we had sort of a main method. So that's what I would do here. I would just public void run game, create my main method. I don't really have anything to put in it yet, but I'm just sort of going to put it there and give it some empty space. So then I can go into my program class and instantiate a game. And then game.run game. So now I have that main method being called in the program class. I am able to, anytime I want to test something, I can just throw it into my run game method here, and I'm ready to, hit start and have it run. One last thing I'm going to do is hit this console.readline at the end, so that my console doesn't automatically exit. So it stays up and I can actually see the things that get printed to the console. So now this is where I would start to think about, right now when I hit start, this is what's going to run, this method. So now I want to start to think about like what's actually going to happen from the very first thing in the game to the very last thing in the game. And this is where I would start to, leave some comments to try to section that off. And similar to Robots Dinos, anytime you've got a game, it could be helpful to think of like an intro section or intro or welcome. Then actually think of like rounds of gameplay, and then end game. What's going to happen after we've reached the condition that will cause us to know that the game is finished. So thinking about the intro, what's probably the first thing that we want to happen when I hit start? What do I want to see on the console? Feel free to.
A welcome line.
Exactly. Yeah, I think a welcome method. Welcome message, rather. Cool. What else do we want to happen in this intro section?
Do rules.
Use your game.
I think display rules so that the person running the program knows what's actually going on, imagining that this is not someone who has the user stories in front of them. They're just trying to play a game. Cool. What else would we probably want in this intro section?
Choose your game mode.
Yep.
Yeah. Choose game mode. So that would be like
Player one versus player two, or player versus computer.
exactly. Choose game mode. PvP or PV, is it PVC? Okay, we'll say human versus human. Cool.
Britt, you're posting this video today?
Yes. Yeah, we'll be dropping this in the channel after it loads up. Cool. So anything else that we'd want to happen in the intro? Well, there's some other sort of like optional game, what would I call it? Variables, like
Computer versus computer.
Choose your character.
yeah, player name, number of rounds, sort of anything like that that is involved in setting up how our game's going to run, but isn't actually part of, a round of play. So yeah, and yeah, we could also maybe do computer versus computer up here. It's not in the user stories, but hopefully, we could maybe think about adding that as an option at some point. Cool. So yeah, I think that's probably it for the intro section. I can't think of anything else unless anyone else has anything to add for the intro. Cool. And so then now moving on to an actual round of gameplay. What do we think that would actually look like from the very start of one round to the very end of one round?
I think it would have to kind of be turn-based, but store the variables together so that you can compare.
Yeah, I think that's all good. That's good stuff. I think getting a little ahead, like I'm not really thinking about the code quite yet. We're just sort of thinking about user experience.
Have to have the players choose what they're going to.
Exactly. So actually make a player making a choice. And we can break that down to player 1 makes a gesture choice. And then player 2 makes a gesture choice. So player 1 makes a gesture choice, player 2 makes a gesture choice. Are we missing anything here? Now this is sort of a subtle thing, but do we actually want to display possible gestures in between? I think that might be a good idea. So maybe display gesture options. Now, this might be part of the gesture choice method. It might be its own method. I don't really know quite yet. And let's even say if human. Because if we've got a computer, do we need to display the gesture options to the computer?
No.
Nope.
Yeah, I don't think so. We could, but probably not necessary. Cool. So then now I think getting to what Nick was saying is that after each player makes a choice, what's the next thing we want to do with those choices?
Want to compare them.
Exactly. Yeah, we want to compare the players' gestures. Anything else we want to happen in a round of gameplay?
And give the winner a point
Yeah.
for
Exactly.
the round.
Winner gets a point. So this, to me, this sounds like a complete round of gameplay. We display a gesture option for each player, or we display a gesture option if, for the player one. Player 1 makes a choice. Display it again if they need it. Player 2 makes a choice. We compare the gestures, and then we give a point to the winner. After this happens, I think we now would move on to next round when would we not want to move on to the next round?
If the game's over.
Game's over.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we move on to the next round if no one has won yet. Okay, so then this is a round of gameplay. Obviously we're going to be doing multiple rounds. So what does that say that this is probably going to be inside?
A loop.
A while loop.
Exactly, yeah. I think while loop is probably the right call, but I still am not jumping too much into the code yet. So maybe when we go to code this, we might find out there's a better way to do it. But I think for now, while loop is probably a great guess. So let's leave that in our sort of thinking. And now thinking about the end game, after someone has reached the point, someone has enough points to no longer play rounds a game. What is left for this application to do?
Display a winner.
Yeah. Display the winner. Anything else?
Ask if they want to play again.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
This time for money.
Cool. And are we missing anything in any section that anyone can think of? Yeah, it seems pretty good to me as well. And now, like, you know, now we start to think about, okay, which are actually tied to user stories. Like this is a great feature. I don't know if I don't think there's a user story for it. You know, same with this type of stuff. Could be useful, but do we need it to reach MVP? So like once you've sort of figured out your preferred flow for the game, then it's start to think, okay, so what do I need to tackle first? What would be a good idea to jump into, and what can I sort of leave for later? Being because, you know, you don't want to end up spending half a day on this if you still aren't, you know, comparing the player's gestures. Yeah. So it's sort of, you know, once you have a good idea of how your game is going to flow, then start to think, you know, what might be the best thing to tackle first.
Britt,
What's that?
did we leave out something? Should be a 2 out of 3, I think we're supposed to be doing. So is that included in the loop there?
Oh, got it. Yeah, so I think that's probably going to be part of the while loop. So the idea of the winner getting a point, you know, we're going to do it, you know, that's going to come into play here.
In the code, yeah.
Yeah, so like once someone has enough points, then we're going to sort of break out of our loop. So yeah, I think, you know, a good idea might be to sort of maybe do some of the easier things, you know, maybe a welcome message first. Void welcome. You know, obviously that would just be a console write line. Display rules. That would just be some console write lines. So yeah, we could do stuff like that. You know, I'm not going to go ahead and type all these out, but we sort of have these placeholders. So now we can actually insert these into our code. And already we sort of have a start to our game that we can, you know, hit start on and watch this actually happen. So then, you know, the next step, we've got our welcome, we got our display rules. Now the choose game mode. This is where we start to get a little bit deeper, thinking about, you know, think about stuff that isn't just console write lines. So dealing with the idea of having a human or a computer playing, what does that say? I mean, what do we need to start with before we can even think about that? You know, I'm starting to see that, you know, all of our classes don't actually have any member variables yet.
Yeah.
So now we might want to start thinking about, okay, how do we, you know, where are these member variables going to be? We have a player class, but the player like isn't really in the game at all. So what member variables might we think that the game would have?
The players.
Yeah, definitely. We'll have a public player, player 1, public player, player 2. We definitely need a player 1 and a player 2. Now you can see that I've declared it as type player. That is the parent class. It's an abstract class. So since it's an abstract class, I can't in here say player 1 equals new player. I'm guessing I'm going to get an error. Cannot create an instance of the abstract class. So what would I have to change here? What is player?
Human.
Yeah, I think player 1 is going to be a human. I mean, well, unless, you know, for now, you know, this option still is something we could do at some point, but it's sort of like, you know, not for MVP. So I think for now, let's just sort of treat it as if player 1 is always going to be human. Now, can we do the same for player 2? Can we say player 2 equals anything yet?
No.
Yeah, I think we want to sort of, it's not going to be a simple, value assignment like this. So to me, that says that we might want to make a method. Public void, let's say, determine player 2. Oops. So this is what, inside this method, we're going to, sort of do this. If we want player 2 to be human, we'll do something like this. If we want it to be a computer, we'll do something similar, except it'll be player 2 equals new computer. So we're going to do one or the other. So anytime that our logic is going to either sort of go one route or go the other route, what type of logical tool does that suggest to you?
If.
Exactly. I think if statement. So we can sort of start saying like if else. Now I don't quite know what I want to be in here yet. So I'm going to sort of leave it blank. But what I want to do is say if, if something, then I want player 2 equals new human, else player 2 equals new computer. So I still have this error here. So this, I really hate having hanging errors. So I really want to take care of this pretty soon. So, what do we need to do to figure out if we want to go this way or that way?
That's the right line. User input or something.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we want to grab some user input somehow. So maybe we'll do, do you want 1-player game or 2-player game? And then we'll grab some input and say, string response equals sol.readline.
Right, I got a quick question.
Yeah.
So on the user stories, it says to detect like bad input and stuff. So wouldn't a switch case work better for this? Because if they put in a value that we don't have, it'll just go to a default and remove it.
Yes, that's a great point. And validation is what you're getting at. I don't know if the user story specifically mentions the word validation, but that's sort of what you're talking about. Yeah. Validation is an important thing. However, it's also sort of like a finishing touch in an application. I don't typically think about validation before I have a working program. I think it's a good idea to sort of build your program assuming that you're testing it out, you're only going to enter the right stuff. And then once you have a working program, then coming back to say, okay, now how could someone potentially break it? And that's, there may be a couple places where that would happen. And so I wouldn't want to spend too much time, on that right here before I have a working problem or before I have a working program. So yeah, you're definitely right to keep that in mind. And I would sort of now, maybe down here, give myself a message. Remember validation to come back to that. So yeah, great point, but I'm not going to worry about it too much right now. Response is our variable here. So we're saying if response is equal to, so we'll say like type 1 or 2. So if response is equal to 1, if response is equal to 2, player 2 is going to be a new human, else player 2 is going to be a new computer. So yeah, totally. Right off the bat here, we see, if I type in 2, I'm going to get a 2-player game. But if I type in anything else, if I type in, hello, it's going to be treated as a 1-player game because I've got this else here. So yeah, this is definitely going to be a place where we'll want to come back and do some validation. So now we've got determine player 2. So that's sort of right here. determine player 2. Cool. So now, next step, we got our optional stuff, player name, number of rounds. Like I said, this is cool stuff. It would be good to implement, but definitely not part of MVP. It's not a user story, so I'm not going to worry about it too much. So yeah, I think we're good to move into like trying to actually think about planning a round of gameplay. So that to me says that we're going to want to move into the player class, since that's what's going to do a lot of this stuff. So what member variables would a player need?
Their like choice of rock, paper, all that.
Yeah, exactly. I think we need some place to sort of hold that choice that they're making. So let's do public string gesture choice.
Yeah. Good.
Just put that in the player class, like the chosen action. And have
Yeah. So this actual choice is living on the player object itself.
Oh, I thought you were on human.
Oh, got it. Well, now that the human inherits from player, the human will also have that, which is super useful. So does the player need anything else for our gameplay? What else?
A score?
Yeah, definitely. Player will need a score. So if a player wins a round, this member variable on that player, we want to go up by 1, and so on. So a player has a choice, it has a score. Does a player need anything else?
List of gestures to choose from.
Yeah, good catch. One of the user stories says that the game needs to incorporate a list of gestures. A couple of different places where that could be, but I think having it on the player class is probably a good place to put it for now. We can always end up moving it if we need to, but for now, let's definitely put it here. And now, so we do have this gesture class. We could have it as gestures, but I'm just gonna, for now, let's just make it a list of strings. We'll have a string that says rock, a string that says paper, and so on. I think, for now, for, first run MVP, I think that should hopefully do the trick. All right, so now, what do we want our score to start out at? I think 0. Could say gestures equals new list of strings, and here's where we would put in our options, rock, paper. And so this is sort of holding this information for the entire application at the moment. So I want to make sure that I, don't have any typos here. I want to make sure that rock, paper, scissors. I often see people spell kind of funky. Lizard as well. Cool. So now we think about member methods. Well, what can a player do?
Pick a choice.
Yeah, definitely. Public void choose gesture. And actually, let's make this an abstract method as well. Why do you think we'd want to do that? Oops.
As the computer can do it automatic.
Yeah, because we want each subclass to do this very differently. The human is going to, and actually if we go in here, we now see an error that human does not implement this method. So let's put that in. Public,
Override, right?
Override, correct. We want to override void choose gesture. Again, I want to take this out. So this is where, with this being a human, what's probably going to be a big part of this method?
Displaying the choices.
Yeah, actually displaying, and then displaying choices. What's the second part?
Selecting the choice.
Yeah, so like sort of somehow grabbing user input. So getting user input. So now the flip side of that, you know, the computer, what's the computer going to do?
And a randomly roll for it.
Yeah, exactly. The computer is going to probably do utilize random to choose gesture. Cool. So we now have the human who's able to choose a gesture. We have a computer who's able to choose a gesture. Since they're both overriding in their own unique ways, you know, in our game, we can now do something like, I mean, we can do player one dot choose gesture, player two dot choose gesture, and it no longer matters what, you know, player two could be a human or a computer at this point. It doesn't matter. It's still going to be able to choose a gesture. So we will also need a way to compare our gestures, right? What class do you think that's going to be happening on?
The game class.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think since the game class has access to player one and has access to player two, the game class is really the only place that we would be able to compare something that lives on this object and this object. So yeah, I think we'll want compare gestures here so that we could then call compare gestures down there. So now what we're going to end up doing here is actually, so how many different outcomes will compare gestures have?
A lot.
Well, there's going to be,
5, 10.
there'll be a lot of possibilities, right? But what about outcome? Like what actually is going to happen inside this method?
Wow. 3 outcomes: win,
Exactly.
lose, and draw.
Yeah, so either P1 gets a point, P2 gets a, what's the third option?
With the draw.
Yeah.
We get the point.
Tie round. So we know that inside this method, we have to figure out what condition is going to end up with this, what conditions are going to end up with this, and what condition is going to end up with that. Cool. So then compare gestures. So we'll also want a display winner function, which actually let's say display winner of game, just to keep it clear. So that's going to come down, oops, display. Cool. So I think this is sort of, you know, shaping up. This is, you know, sort of the rough, you know, outline of how this game could work. Like I said in the beginning, you know, it doesn't have to go exactly like this. But this sort of, you know, routine of sort of before even stepping into the logic, thinking about how, you know, how I'm going to actually do all of the things that a game needs to do. And then starting to think about actually, you know, creating methods that are going to do those things. Maybe I don't necessarily know what that method is going to do quite yet or how I'm going to do it. But I know that, you know, I'm going to be doing this inside this function. I'm going to be doing something else in this function. It sort of gives me, you know, very concrete things to work on. Now it's like, okay, so now I've got to actually get in there and make sure that, you know, my players choose, or sorry, my humans choose gesture is working. I need to do my computers choose gesture. It really gives you places to focus instead of sort of getting sent down rabbit holes and ending up, you know, putting a lot of work into something that, you know, doesn't end up getting into your finished product. So So with that, I'll probably let y'all get back to it soon here. Do we have any questions before I let you go? I will be dropping this in the channel, this code as well, so you can look through it.
It helps me anyway.
Awesome. So yeah, I would recommend, doing something like this at, for the first, 20 to 30 minutes every time you get a new project. Start to, leave yourself some comments to collect your thoughts before you really even start coding, and then start jumping into the code. It really gives you a good place to start.
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. So yeah, I will let you go. Thanks for joining and participating. This is a good one.
Thank
Thanks
you,
a lot,
Brett.
Brett.
Appreciate it greatly.
For sure. See you soon.
Bye-bye.